All right. Well, many of us grew up being told, and I'm wondering how many of you knew this when you were, or not being told, that there were two creation stories. Did any of you get that memo when you were young? A few of you did, but most of us didn't. We just thought chapter 1, which is the first story told in Genesis chapter 1. In the beginning, when God made heaven and earth, the earth was without form and void, and so on. And then there's the poetic litany of the 6 days of creation, each day ending with the refrain, and it was good. And then on final 7th day, God rests. That's chapter 1 of Genesis. That's the first story. And I just always thought the second story was just a continuation of the first, but in fact, this is a second story that was redacted or edited and spliced in to follow it. And that's chapter 2, and essentially the 5th verse of chapter 2 and beyond. Here we hear of the beautiful idyllic garden where everything is in harmony. Out of the dust, God forms man, the man, and the man was lonely. And so God forms Eve from Adam while he sleeps, and all is well for a while, as long as the couple stayed away from the forbidden tree of the knowledge of good and evil in the middle of the garden. Whereas there's also another tree, the tree of life. And everything, as long as they did that, would be, that one restriction would be presumably stress-free and harmonious and pleasurable. And then, as good Hebrew storytelling must do, as well as all good story really, the plot thickens. Enter the snake, or as I like to personalize it, I'm just going to make it a personal pronoun. Enter snake. I see snake. I say that because I've started to see snake as a kind of trickster. Not unlike coyote in the North American native stories. Anyway, snake convinces Eve that God is merely insecure, basically, and God just doesn't want humans to have knowledge and become like God. So Eve, understanding the snake's rationale and falling into that temptation, she eats the fruit. It tastes good. Her eyes are open. That is, she becomes self-aware. And she offers the fruit to Adam. And Adam eats too. And his eyes are opened. Again, they become self-aware. They understand themselves to be naked, which is another way of saying they understand themselves as vulnerable. And they are ashamed. And when God comes looking for them, as if God can't see them, they try and hide. It's almost humorous. And then God asks, as if God needed to ask, "What have you done? Have you eaten of the forbidden fruit?" And then what happens? Adam blames Eve. Eve blames the snake. And poor snake, I guess, just takes the rap. There's no one for snake to blame, apparently. And so ends the state of being in the blissful state of harmony, and the human journey of learning and wisdom begin. A journey of lost innocence and suffering. This is, in my mind, an archetypal story of our existence. A story of life and its journey, whereby the very essence of our life is one of wrestling with the knowledge of good and evil. It is a necessary journey. The story tells us that our human destiny, in part, is one of suffering and striving. And from that, we learn and grow into the knowledge of good and evil. We trade comfort and naivete for wisdom and knowledge and growth. For reasons that I assume, or at least hope, we will someday know on the other side of this earthly veil why it is we had to leave the state of innocence and live into this thing we call the journey of our life. As the first creation story tells us, all the created order is good and pleasing to God. Yet, as we come to see in the second creation story, while life is still good, it is also hard. I don't have to tell you this. It's hard, it's perplexing, it's precarious, and sometimes cruel and painful in ways we wish it were not. I love the part of this story where Adam and Eve try to hide from God, as if. It's like when we are small children playing hide and seek with adults. The kids are all hiding behind the sofa, giggling because they think they're hidden, while the adult is pretending to be looking and not knowing. Gee, I wonder where Michelle is. She sure is hiding good. I have no idea. And behind the couch, giggle, giggle, giggle. And the adult goes, there you are. We've played that, right? It's fun. Well, the game of hide and seek is a fun game. The game of life is much more complex, often infused with perplexity, lostness, and nuance. As for this need we have to, quote, hide, it's such a common human desire to flee from being found out, isn't it? Shame and embarrassment are common human feelings from very early in our lives. We hide from each other. We hide even from ourselves. And we think we hide from God. Again, as if. In my body, I physically, that's better, easy, more understand. I physically remember once when my family was visiting my grandma at her house here in Boise. I was spinning around in her chair in the living room. I was told to be careful because I might knock over the lamp. But I was having fun and didn't heed the warning. And sure enough, as you know what I'm going to say, I knocked over the lamp and it broke. I might have been mildly scolded, and I'm sure I was, but what I most vividly remember was hiding my head in the cushion of the couch for what seemed like a very long time because I was ashamed and embarrassed. I didn't want to be seen. I wanted to melt into that cushion. I know this is not a unique story. You all have stories, I'm sure, like that, where you tried to hide. You were ashamed or embarrassed. We still hide in shame. We still have dark secrets that we might wish to hide even from God. But like the first humans, we can't hide from God. We can't hide from God any more than we can hide from ourselves. But we do try. As a way to deal with some of this, Catholics in particular might go to confession. Perhaps, I imagine this is why some of us do spiritual direction. to come out of hiding. Or we may go into therapy. That's what therapists do. They help us come out of our hidden places. They gently listen to us and provide a safe place to be vulnerable. A place where we can begin to come out of hiding and not be judged, and hopefully reclaim our original goodness. And speaking of original, we've heard about original sin, right? From this story, from Genesis 3, the 4th century bishop, St. Augustine, popularized, he didn't invent it, but he certainly popularized the concept of original sin. This idea, which I can't help but also hear expressed in some of Paul's writings in the epistles, basically says that because Adam and Eve's transgression in the garden, we, every single person since born, is tainted by sin and therefore, from birth, in danger of eternal damnation. And from there we get the terrifying concern that infants must be baptized lest they die unsaved and thus perish in hell. That's kind of messed up when we think about it. I think such theology has created a great deal of havoc and unnecessary suffering upon our human minds, bodies, and spirits. In fact, I would say it is at the root of much of our fear-based mentality expressed in religion and flows over into politics and into policy making even. I don't think I exaggerate, but most people wouldn't probably see it those roots, but I kind of wonder about that. Now, I don't pretend to know what damnation is, or if it is. I don't pretend to understand how God judges our lives. I don't understand the roots of evil and human cruelty. I don't understand what hell is, other than the hell we put our fellow creatures through here on earth. But I do know that the idea of original sin, as it has been commonly understood, taught, and preached, doesn't make a lot of moral or theological sense. I do know / believe that God is love. I do know / believe that God is just and fair. This, in the minds of unbelievers, may not be fact, but for me, as I suspect for you too, it is an unwavering and unshakable, eternal theological and biblical truth. God is love, and this love never gives up. It is eternal and does not have an expiration date. I once had a kid at a Lutheran day camp ask me the classic hypothetical question on this matter. She asked me, if a baby dies and isn't baptized, will the baby go to hell? And what I said to her was, well, none of us really knows what happens when we die and where we go. But I do know this: God is loving and fair. Do you think it would be loving and fair for a little baby to be sent to hell? And she, of course, replied, no. To which I responded, neither do I. End of discussion. As I said in the weekly e-bulletin that went out, I think this idea of original sin has been one of the most consequential theological notions of the whole Christian Western tradition. And I say consequential, not in a good way. As the writer Matthew Fox suggested decades ago, wouldn't we be better served if we started our theological foundation with the idea of original blessing? Were that the case, would we be living in a fundamentally different world today? Oh, sure, there would always be greed and ignorance and fear, which are the roots of human-caused suffering and evil. But wouldn't we be better to start off our lives by remembering and being rooted in the first chapter of Genesis, whereby all creation is pronounced good, by the very creator of it all? Did the Creator not make us fundamentally and profoundly good and beautiful and precious? Based upon the Genesis 1 story, I would say yes. Would we not be better off if we saw this second creation story, from which our meditation comes today, as an informative story of lost innocence, a journey we must all take? And don't get me wrong, I think we all must covet and protect innocence in the early and formative years of our children's lives. In our innocence, we learn to trust that life is good and joyful and wondrous, and that adults and the community that the adults inhabit are supportive and safe. As the psychologist Erik Erikson taught us long ago, the first stage of life, or one of the very earliest stages of life, is a stage of developing trust. This is a stage that must be set first before we are strong enough to leave the garden and to face the trials and tribulations of life, with its slings and arrows of outrageous fortune. The story we meditate upon this morning reminds us that none of us can nor should live in the garden of innocence forever. Our children, at the appropriate times, and maybe all too soon, and tragically inappropriately, will venture out from the garden and learn that life isn't always fair. That there is pain, and people fail, including themselves and the people they love the most. We owe it to them and to ourselves to remember that we cannot take this journey alone. We are all designed to be there for each other, working our way toward wisdom in our own way, entering the world as Christ entered it, fully engaged, vulnerable, always faithful, and never, ever forgetting the divine creator of all will not let us go. Amen? Amen. Amen. That was a whole 7-page sermon. I don't know if we have time for questions, but my main question I put at the bottom of this is, how has the concept of original sin perhaps brought our society to the sorry state of affairs it now finds it in? Something to think about.
Let's turn to